Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today's guest is Zach Bush, MD. Dr. Zach is a renowned multidisciplinary physician of internal medicine, endocrinology, hospice care, and an internationally recognized educator on the microbiome as it relates to human health, soil health, food systems, and a regenerative future.
Hello, everybody. If you're someone that regularly listens to my podcast, I don't need to tell you about all the amazing doctors and scientists that have sacrificed their safety, job security, and much more to come forth with the truths behind the whole COVID pandemic. I'm sure most of you have been getting well educated on your own. At least I hope you have. What I will share is that among the numerous experts with important messages that I've studied, Zach Bush, MD, stands alone in his deep, honest, holistic, and often profound insights into the actual causes of the coronavirus pandemic and the mismanagement of the pandemic by governments, medical systems, and the likes. At this point, there must be at least 20 or more interviews with him on video and podcasts, so I wanted to get deeper with him and not just have him repeat what he's shared already. I was deeply curious as to the formative forces that converged within the universe to create such a well-rounded, truly spiritual and holistic medical doctor. I wanted to know his spiritual philosophy because it is quite true that our religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, and what we deem to be first principle or source has the greatest influence on our belief system, which is the greatest influence on our choices and actions in the world. Therefore, no matter how many Zach Bush interviews you've seen or heard, none of them comes close to this for really getting to know what makes him the man he is. And he truly is a blessing to us all, the world, and he's here, vital as ever, right when we need him most. Get ready for a deep dive into the truths of the medical system, as well as our dialogue on religion, spirituality, and some quantum physics to back it up. This was a really fun dialogue for me, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Meet Zach Bush. Hello and welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. I'm super excited today to share a guest that I've really been anxious to get on. I was very, very excited when he responded and said he would do it. That's Zach Bush, MD. His information on viruses and exosomes and really his approach to the whole issue of the pandemic and what's going on in the world at many levels is deeply holistic and truly aligned with what I teach at the Chek Institute. So when he responded with a willingness to join us on the podcast today, I was overly excited because I really wanted to share this man's wisdom with you. Zach Bush, thank you for joining us today. I'm deeply grateful for everything that you do and share with the world and the public and all of us for our awakening.
Paul, it's just a pleasure to be with you and your audience and have a human moment together. It's a real pleasure to be on the planet right now.
That's great. Yeah, it's an exciting time. I mean, as scary as it can look for a lot of people, transition is always preceded by chaos. So if we want to make positive changes and change our behaviors, we have to be brave enough to work through the chaos together. But I learned a long time ago through a lot of life experience and study that chaos isn't something to run from. That's a good time to really get still and pay close attention because as almost every creation story in history tells us, the whole universe and the order in the universe emerged out of chaos, which means inherently there must be order hidden within the chaos. So one of the things I loved about your approach is when I've listened to you and watched you on video is that you seem to be quite present with this capacity not to, act irrational or get too freaked out and to, you're like a good skipper that keeps his hands on the wheel. So from the work I've watched you present, I have to say you're one of the most holistic medical doctors I've ever come across. I mean, the only people I would put up there with a mindset as broad as yours and a depth that you have would be people like Deepak Chopra. And there's not too many people that I would give that credential to. Can you give us an overview of your life path and what led you to the holistically integrated approach to human health and life that you practice? And who are some of the greatest people that influenced you to become the man you are today?
Awesome. Well, thank you for the opportunity to dive in. Deepak and I just actually penned a couple of articles for the San Francisco Gate in the last month and a half or so together. That was a fun collaboration there. And I certainly have deep respect for the body of science and clinical perspective and philosophy that he's developed with his teams over the years. But my journey was similar to his, I guess, in the sense that we were both endocrinologists, and so I was definitely baked in the classic box of allopathic Western medicine. I went into internal medicine with a real interest in mood disorders. I was studying the relationship between endocrinology as a hormone base and its effect on neuroplasticity. Late 1990s, I got really passionate, interested in that, and it turned out that the decade of the 2000s there was ultimately termed the decade of the brain, and that decade of the brain discovered more about the neurologic reality within our central and peripheral nervous systems than we had known in all previous human history. So it was an explosive time. And one of the profound realizations that came out of that body of science was the realization that the brain is constantly in motion. The brain is changing all of the time, rewiring, hardwiring, soft wiring, and relearning all of the time. The idea that we are born with this number of neurons and they just disappear over the time, that disappeared during that decade. We came to realize that the brain is in a renewal state, much like the rest of the body, throughout a lifetime. The breakdown of the brain and the neurologic systems, both peripherally and centrally, seem to be rooted in a disruption in the foundational biology of the microbiome. And it would be that realization of the gut-brain axis of around the 2005 to 2010 era that would start to blow open the entire area of Western allopathic mindset and philosophy, as we started to realize through the study of genomics that a shift in the microbiome within the gut was not just the precursor to sleep and mood disorders and sexual function. It was the precursor to autoimmune disease. It was the precursor to cancers of every sort. It was the precursors to something as simple as acne and something as complex as autism. It was the root cause of neurodegenerative conditions. So this microbiome, by the end of that decade, became the next explosive scientific realm. And I just find myself very fortunate to, in both of those decades, been blessed with the opportunity to participate in these new discussions around these two new environments of the brain, the neurologic system as a whole, and then this incredible ecology of the gut microbiome. And now what subsequently has emerged in the last few years is the reality that within every single organ system, there's a healthy ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, and the rest that will live there and thrive there to help foster and bolster human health at the cellular level. The idea that there are bacteria and fungi within the human brain, for example, was just so far out that it could not have even landed in a medical school textbook 10 years ago. But now it's, part and parcel to our understanding of Alzheimer's and autism and all these neurologic conditions, is these shifts in the microbiome happening as we see disease emerge. For some time, we thought that perhaps the presence of the microbiome was causative towards the disease, but subsequently, of course, we found that the less microorganism response and chaos control that you see at the tissue level once the disease emerges, the faster that disease progresses. And so it's starting to look like at every avenue, whether it be gut health or brain health or kidney health or beyond, the microbiome is there to support, augment, and ultimately step in as chaos control and a regenerative kind of realignment with nature when we, through our stressful lifestyles and toxic environments, start to get off the path, if you will.
Who were some of the biggest influences in what now is your living philosophy, be it medicine or otherwise?
Well, there's so many. I think that it begins, of course, with my parents. Much different worldviews in some ways between my dad's kind of creative right brain strengths and my mom's analytical mind. My mom was ultimately went into nursing at the same time I went into medicine, so it was fun to walk that journey into human health with her. We, as a family, have found ourselves frequently in this kind of crossroads of the medical environment, my siblings and beyond, aunts, uncles, and the like. And so I've had a lot of influence, I think, from family members, and one of them was my aunt that I ended up going to the Philippines with. Was going into engineering and decided to take a year off, and shortly after that decision, she called up and got me over to the Philippines to practice in a multidisciplinary international group of midwives in birthing babies in the squats of the Philippines, and had just an extraordinary journey into the realization of the miracle of life, the tenacity that life has for perseverance and resilience within really desperate situations of poverty and malnutrition and the like. Seeing children become thriving, cheerful, joyful, in fact, contributors to society when there seems to be such stark challenges and such a lack of hope on so many of the sociologic levels that we've been programmed in the Western world to think of. And so I think those were some of those impressionable moments in life where you start to realize that there's something much deeper than building machines and robots, as I had initially thought I wanted to do. There's something about being alive that's demanding our exploration into the natural world to understand perhaps what we've done here over the last couple 100,000 years, the mistakes we've made, and really the opportunity we have to realign this species with a much grander purpose of a co-creative and nurturing process with Mother Nature to see if we can explore the depths and ultimate lengths of longevity of the human mind and spirit, and see if we can't just change the way Homo sapiens interact with this world around us.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful, and what a great underpinning to your philosophy and practice as a medical doctor. I have 3 kids. My first one's 40, my second one's 4, and my third one's 11 months old.
Oh, congratulations! That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just quite a journey. I had quite a surprise at 54 when I have 2 wives. Angie got pregnant with Mana, and it's the last thing I thought I wanted, but the kid just blew my heart wide open and just revived me. And my third one, my little girl Zoe, she just that was my first girl, and I'll tell you, there's something between daddy and daughter that's really, really powerful, and she's got me wrapped around her finger. But the point I'm leading to is we work very closely with some highly skilled midwives and midwives that were also shaman, and I actually have a lot of background in rehabilitation and working in medicine and spending a lot of time in surgery, and have done a lot of cadaver dissections. And I was just truly impressed with the midwives' knowledge. I think midwives are some of the most underappreciated and highly knowledgeable people that interact with human beings, and really should be given more of a voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it was really the perfect foundation. I didn't know it at the time, obviously, but in hindsight, it was the perfect foundation for me to root into, is the experience of staying out of the way, really, of life at its best. And when we were delivering babies in the Philippines, the typical experience was be called to a home birth and show up in a little tin shack with a dirt floor pressed against 100 other tin shacks, surrounded by mud and no indoor plumbing. And you'd walk in, and the woman who's in labor presents you with a tea service and a few hors d'oeuvres to sit down, and honors you and thanks you for your support and help. And then at some point with her labor proceeding, you step into the room with the bed, and she lays down, and moments later, it seems, is giving birth to a baby, and then placing the baby in the midwife's hands for evaluation, then hops up and will serve tea on your way out. Like, it was like this experience that I thought I was going to do something. I thought I was like going to be this healthcare provider, only to find out that, outside of the kind of disease mindset of allopathic Western medicine, where we even treat childbirth as disease, to have this pre-existing experience that childbirth and the miracle of life entering through us, especially through womankind, is such a natural part of life, that if we could see it as something other than a crisis, something other than a life-threatening event, which it can be in the impoverished, malnourished environment of the Philippines. And that, yet even there, they're not treating it that way. They see it as a part of daily life. They expect of themselves their capacity to bring forth this miracle with little more than a nice witness and a sense of safety in the arms of other women. And these midwives were just so good at, creating that sense of safe space and hallowed ground for life to enter through. And when I did my first rotation in medical school, I made it OBGYN because I really thought that was the direction I was headed. My pager went off on my first day. I rushed down to the emergency room with excitement, with meeting the OB and the high-risk fetal specialist down there, only to find this woman who had just overdosed on cocaine and was going into ventricular tachycardia, and she was 6 months pregnant. And so we rushed her in, did a crash C-section. It was skin to baby in 38 seconds. I had never seen anything so horrific, just basically a massive, surgical incision swiped across her abdomen, hands plunged into the abdomen and pulled this baby out into the world in less than a minute. And that experience, as the mother ended up dying in those next couple minutes, and this baby surviving that and ending up going into severe, drug withdrawal over the subsequent days and dying of secondary pneumonia a couple weeks later, it was just the polar opposite of everything I had seen in the Philippines. It was the polar opposite of this. And so I saw at the extreme end of the mechanized, technological, surgically empowered, United States system playing out what could only be imagined as a horrific science fiction movie, in contrast to this, age-old, respect-infused, natural process of birth in the hands of the midwives in these impoverished communities. It just could not be, in the end, a better look at what we've created with a $3.5 trillion U.S. medical system and how far we've come in our march away from nature and her intention for our co-creative capacity.
Yes. There's lots I want to say, but I don't want to railroad us. But that's the experience that happens all too often, and I've seen it. I've lived through it. And one of my friends, who actually I met because our OBGYN was on vacation and he had a replacement, and we were overjoyed when we met the replacement. His name is Nathan Riley, MD. He's somebody I'd like to connect you to because he's really working from the inside, doing his very best to rectify some of these problems. And he's a truly holistic man that I really think you'd find harmony with. So I'll do my best to connect the two of you. And while you were talking, I wrote a note. I think I might have a little something I can share with you that, if you can get your hands on it, would be quite an interesting experience for you. As you've studied the gut and the microbiome and all these types of things, I've been studying this stuff for a very long time, and I have quite a comprehensive library. And many years ago, I came across a book called The Abdominal and Pelvic Brain by Byron Robinson, MD, published first edition 1899, second edition 1909. Are you familiar with those works?
I am not. Somehow my library doesn't go back far enough. I need to forge back another 50 years.
Well, Penny bought me the 1899 edition as a gift because I tracked it down through a rare book dealer. I think it cost $1,000 probably 15 or 20 years ago. And the 1909 edition is amazing. This thing's about, 800 pages, and Byron Robinson, MD, did all the drawings in it himself, and they are exquisite. And he is a very deep dude. And one time I used to do work in functional medicine and did a 3-year training program where I worked directly with Bill Timmons, the founder of BioHealth Diagnostics, and him and I traded services. And one of his education directors was a man with 2 MDs and a PhD. And he came to visit me one day, and he brought me this book called The Abdominal Brain, which came out a few years ago, and he was all excited about it. And talking all about it, and I'd already read it. And I said, that's actually not new news at all. And so he was like, what are you talking about? He says, I've studied this stuff all the time. I said, follow me. And I took him into my library and I handed him The Abdominal and Pelvic Brain by Byron Robinson, and he almost pooped himself. He was like, oh my God. He looked through that book and he said, I cannot believe this much knowledge was available that long ago. I said, that's why I look into the older books, because you can find the roots of a lot of the things we're thinking are new today. But anyhow, it's The Abdominal and Pelvic Brain by Byron Robinson, MD. And I think you might be able to find it for free on the internet. I had one of my students tell me they found it on the internet for free. But I would love it if you would send me an email or a text after you get a look at that book, because I think you're going to be mind boggled at how much this guy knew all the way back then.
That's amazing.
I hope you're all enjoying my amazing deep conversation with Zach Bush. If you've not heard his many podcasts or seen his videos, he is a big supporter of organic farming and regenerative agriculture, just as I am. When it comes to getting great immune support, sleep support, nutrition to optimize joint health, green juices, high-quality protein supplementation for the whole family, or a natural energy boost, and even much more, Organifi is a great choice. The products are organic and super clean, highly nutritious, and great for the whole family. If you want efficiency with optimal nutrition, you'll love knowing that all you have to do is add water, mix, and presto, you get highly nutritious satiation and satisfaction, and they travel well and are great on the job too. My family and my clients love Organifi, and I know you will too. Go to Organifi.com, that's Organifi.com, and on checkout, use the code all caps, capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20 to get your 20% discount on purchase. To get to know the founder of Organifi, Drew Canoli, listen to my podcast number 64, Drew Canoli, UBU, and I think you'll find out why I love this guy so much. Enjoy.
It doesn't surprise me in the sense that, we were really knocking on the door of a new paradigm of science by the late 1800s. And, a good example of this is in the microbiome. We had, Louis Pasteur, duking it out with Antoine Béchamp, who was really arguing that there was the possibility that human disease did not have anything to do with the individual or their genetics, but actually had everything to do with the terrain of their body and the ecosystem around them. And what we now find out is we could have accelerated, medical technology and research by 150 years if we had gone down the Antoine Béchamp pathway. And unfortunately, we chose the Louis Pasteur germ theory, kind of mentality, and decided we need to kill all bacteria and germs for the next 150 years, placing us today at this pinnacle of ecologic collapse as we've developed the global herbicide, pesticide, and obviously the antibiotic era of medicine to wreak massive havoc in this dependent ecosystem that really fosters all biology to its full potential, including human health, obviously. So, those late 1800s were an interesting tipping point into what would ultimately become the pharmaceutical codependence of allopathic medicine. And there was another renaissance of that thinking that happened after World War II, when we saw the rise of Reif and a bunch of other people that were coming out of the post-Einstein relativity world, where we started to realize that we're not Newtonian biologic creatures, but we're ultimately atomic physics creatures that are governed by quantum physics and not some sort of old school biologic machinery.
Right.
And we had the opportunity to go down that avenue of energy medicine and frequency resonance therapies and all of that we're finally getting back to. Now you see people with laser therapy and ultrasound therapy. We could have easily had that technology 50 years ago if we had allowed that system of quantum physics to impact medicine sooner. But again, we really were steeped in this biochemistry, cell biology, old science world. And I would argue if you walk into any medical clinic today, by and large, you're going to see that same antiquated mindset that we are Newtonian biology dependent upon a pharmacological model to stave back, bacteria, Lyme disease, infections of chronic fatigue, all of these things that have emerged. We're beating back the microbiome. We're trying to kill viruses. We're claiming that people now have all these retrovirus infections that cause chronic fatigue syndrome and all this. And so we're still very backwards, whether we look at integrative medicine, functional medicine, or allopathic medicine. We continue to have this disease model that poses us as something at odds with or embattled by nature. And it just could not be further from the truth. And we have an opportunity, I think, with the new emergence of, quantum field theories that are starting to give us a unifying field theory between quantum physics and relativity, and starting to understand the phenomenon of, renewal at the molecular level through atomic reset of water structure and energy vibration, all these things. We're starting to get to that point where we could really expect disease to disappear in moments instead of years or decades. We could get to that point where we could experience a regenerative capacity within human biology as we start to reconnect it to the natural pathways of atomic physics and biologic function within nature's ecosystems.
Yes. A couple of things that came to me while you were talking, actually 1,000 things, but I don't, a guy like you, I can talk to for, 300 days without ever skipping a beat. But, isn't it true though? I remember reading about Pasteur in one of my books that said that on his deathbed, he actually admitted that it was the biological terrain and it wasn't the germ issue. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and I think we hear something similar about Darwin and all these scientists that kind of set us back in scientific knowledge. Doesn't surprise you, and we could say the same thing about the genius mind of Stephen Hawking. He discovered Hawking's particles coming out of black holes in the middle of every galaxy and its relationship to wormholes and all this extraordinary science. But he held throughout most of his life that was just chaotic data flowing out about black holes. And then right at the end of his scientific career, he finally states, no, that's actually structured information, and started to agree with people who had been in severe debate with him for decades. And he finally acknowledged, yes, the predominance of the science says that this is structured information that probably houses the real template for life within the quantum field. And so, unfortunately, it's these people rise to scientific popularity or influence through decades of work. And so, even if they go on to acknowledge in a single deathbed conversation or a single last publication, it's very difficult for them to change the direction on decades of work and thought leadership. And so, because we're prone to believing science as a body of knowledge rather than understanding science is a process. The scientific method is nothing more than a technique for exploring truth. But at no point is science a body of knowledge or truth. And that seems to be forgotten every single day in academic centers and in the, certainly in the public eye. And we start to say, well, here's a scientific truth. Coronavirus causes illness or is causing death of thousands of people, or HIV causes AIDS, or, so we come as a scientific community to have these dogmatic beliefs within a process that is nothing more than a process. It would be very disappointing to any scientist to tell them, oh, we already know everything, so there's no point in you continuing to explore or ask new questions because we already know everything because science has proven this stuff out. If that was our attitude, we would have stopped the scientific methodology hundreds of years ago and failed to progress at all. And so, despite the fact that by the very nature of our continuous exploration through new eyes and new generations of scientists, we seem to be very slow to remember what a loose hand we should have on the data that's coming out of our scientific method. The data is simply a new perspective. It's simply, perhaps at best, a cleaning of the lens at which we're looking through to see nature. But it's never nature. Like, we never produce in a lab the reality of health. We never produce in a lab the reality of reversal of cardiovascular disease or cancer. We never produce in the scientific lab a particle. We don't create an electron. We don't create a proton. we can apply the scientific method to try to explore these extraordinary miracles of matter and quantum physics and ultimately cell biology and human life. But at no point are we actually producing those things. At best, we are witness to them, and the scientific process tries to make us better witness to it. But at no point is there anybody who's an authority on science. That's what's happening to so pollute the mind of our consumers and our politicians today, is that we have these individuals standing up from the NIH or the CDC or the WHO acting like they are authorities on science, when in fact, at best, they are espousing 20 to 30-year-old data that's become scientific dogma over the last couple of decades. And in becoming dogma, it's become the opposite of science. Scientific dogma is an anathemism. We shouldn't be able to put those two things together. And yet, I think we would all agree in the science world that we are subject to dogma and orthodox kind of perspective all the time. If you are a scientist and you try to, stick your head above water and say, is HIV really the cause of agent in AIDS, or is HIV simply one of the many viruses that gets upregulated when the terrain changes of the body in relationship to all viruses? And you do that, you lose your funding, you lose credibility in the science community, you feel rejected as a whole, and it eclipses your capacity to keep advancing your own scientific cause. And so this forces us into these funding angles where we can only ask questions within the current paradigm. That's a disaster for the scientific method. That means we're literally creating, through financial incentivizations, dead ends to thought process, dead ends and reinforcement to orthodoxy and dogma within the scientific community.
Yes, and there's, again, so much I'd like to say in response to that, but some of these things we're going to address as we go. One of the things that popped into my mind is, I'm curious, have you ever seen the book Intestinal Gardening by James Empringham?
That sounds great. I love that already. I have not seen that book.
Okay. It's called Intestinal Gardening by James Empringham, who is an MD, and it was published in 1938. I think you'd find it fascinating.
Very good. I'm always relieved when you tell me the date when I haven't heard of these things at all. I'm like, boy, how did I miss that? And then you tell me the date of 1898 or 1930, and I feel slightly better about the holes in my knowledge base. So thank you for those graceful ways out for me there.
Well, I think you've met someone as passionate about learning as you, sitting right here on the other end of the line. So one day when I get you here, I'll open my library and I'll guide you through some very profound reading.
I love it. I can't wait. That'll be a good education.
And it's as deep in metaphysics as it is in all the other issues, because I'm very interested in source, which is what gives lead to my next question here for you. I'm curious as to what your spiritual philosophy is. Can you share what the word spiritual or spirituality means to you, and what your highest or first principle is, if you could encapsulate that as to what you feel source, God, or whatever your highest principle is, and how you use that belief or philosophy as a means of guiding yourself in relationships and to the world. And the reason I'm asking you that, Zach, is because, Rumi, are you familiar with Rumi, the Persian poet?
Of course.
Well, Rumi said, to get to God, you've got to become a heretic. What he was saying is, you can't keep reading books and thinking God's written on a piece of paper, and memorizing stuff that you read isn't a direct experience of God. And that applies to science as well. To get to truth, you have to become a heretic to the dogma of your day, or you're really just trying to solve a problem from within inside the same box that you're in. And as Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. And so if we don't become a heretic, we don't grow. And so when I listen to people and study people, I'm always interested, what is their first principle? What is the belief? Because if you look, for example, at belief systems, if you keep asking the question, what causes that, or what belief gives foundation to that, you inevitably find that most everything a person says or does is anchored to their core belief, even if it's unconscious. So I'm curious to know, I'll share my first principle with you, but I'd like to know, what is the bedrock foundation of your spiritual philosophy, and what do you think that word spiritual or spirituality actually means?
No, I'm going to force you to deliver first. What is your bedrock?
Well, I've studied world religion extensively because I've been doing this work as a therapist for 36 years, and I found probably in 85% of the cases, I could not help people resolve their pain and challenges until I looked at the belief system that was driving the behavior. And then when I looked into their belief systems, it almost always was rooted in some religious idea that was actually stopping them from healing, such as being a vegetarian for religious reasons, or staying in a marriage where they've been unhappy for 20 years, but they think God will burn them in hell because they promised to stay together till death do you part. And the list is very long. So in my studies of world religion, first of all, when I found the Eastern religions, I was like, oh my God, this is so much more advanced than the Western religions, and so much more deeper and so much more freeing. It was like, as Osho says, the Western religions are religions for children because they all need a daddy in the sky, but the Eastern religions are religions for adults because you have to carry the weight and the responsibility of the choices you make, because in those religions, you're a co-creator with source. Therefore, whatever you create, you have to manage the manifestation. Just like if you have a child, it's your responsibility to raise that child. And when I came across Sufism and studied Sufism, and there's a beautiful book called Universal Sufism that is a really nice encapsulation of Sufism, which, by the way, is very in line with the principles of quantum physics. They describe the principles of Sufism, and the first principle of Sufism hit me like an arrow, and I went, oh my God, I'm a Sufi today, and I'm really quite Sufi. And the first principle of Sufism is this: there is no God but God. I worship everything and everyone. That's my bedrock philosophy.
I like it. I like it. That's a great exploration. And I was raised in a Judeo-Christian environment in a little home church in Boulder, Colorado. Both parents, hippies, went out with the kind of the hippie movement to Boulder. Both of them actually had their Jesus moment within 2 weeks of one another, and then met a day after my dad kind of had his first spiritual awakening moment in this little home church. He walked into his dorm the next day and ran into my mom, and they started talking. And my dad said, "Have you ever had a spiritual experience with Jesus or something like that?" And from that changed the entire course of their lives. They dropped out of college actually within a couple months of that, and threw themselves into leadership in this church ultimately, and explored that pathway for decades. And I grew up in that church and the rest. And so, within a relatively unique environment of Boulder, Colorado, and the hippie movement and all that, it's hard to imagine that as being like an inside the box Judeo-Christian experience. But on the other hand, I think there was limiting features of it in that my mom's family in Pennsylvania had grown up in a pretty conservative Pennsylvania Dutch kind of environment, and so a lot of that inevitably snuck into my worldview as a child, and was certainly handed that Father in the sky as the God description that you handed, and that fit really well and very comfortably for many decades. As I started into life and started my education and everything else, and started to break down, I'd say, really when I started to have kids, and then even further when I started to manage patient care in the ICUs and see a lot of death and dying in the ICU and bone marrow transplant units and all of this, and watching near-death experiences and watching people of every walk and socioeconomic and spiritual background and religious belief system and the rest report back extraordinarily similar experiences on the other side of the veil as they come back and forth in those near-death experiences. And so that started to really fundamentally change things. And then as I started to get into the quantum physics beneath the human biology, started to find some real deep truth in there that actually I found spoken deeply in the Judeo-Christian, Hebrew texts and all that long, thousands of years ago, previous to the English language being the dominant, language of Christianity, if you will, that now so dominates the public eye. Before that, English language text was, deep theology baked into the lexicon of the Greek and the Hebrew in both the Old and the New Testaments, that once dissected down to those, traditional texts and those traditional linguistics, you find out that they're speaking of the quantum physics of the Sufism or of, these other modalities in the East that predate Christianity. And so I think that in the end, as we get down past the social and political lenses that we put all over the modern Judeo-Christian viewpoint, we find out that Christ was really speaking of this co-creative capacity and really calling his disciples and ultimately the world into a co-creative relationship. And in the end, my bedrock has become something really fundamentally simple, which is I am. That's all I have left. That's the only thing I can actually prove to myself on a daily basis is that I am. And if I try to add anything to that, I have to admit that's a human construct. That's something that is now inside a small box of perception. So if I say I am here, then space-time is now thrown in there as a massive caveat or qualifier that can only be limiting and cannot never really capture the full thing. And if I say I am Zach, then I'm telling you that my vibration, the energetic experience of I am somehow began at the moment that I came out of the womb and my parents named me Zach. And I just can't believe that anymore. I think I'm a vibrational energy. Some people call it a soul, but I think I have a deep identity that is aware of I am, heading back deep into the origins of existence within the universe or beyond. And so I am is the bedrock for my physical state as a human being. I am ties me into a deeper reality that goes beyond the physical particle state that happens when we become a physiologically solid, form in our vacuum space expression. And so I am is my physical experience. The interaction or playing a pixel within the greater vibration of universal knowledge is the state that probably preceded my moment of particle human existence and will be a reemergence with that, big vibrational truth on the other side.
I love it. It's beautiful. Turmeric's really, really hot now. There's a lot of scientific research on it, but they're not all created the same. So I brought Autumn Smith on to tell you about Paleo Valley's Turmeric Complex so you know exactly what the benefits are and why you, like me, should get your Turmeric Complex from Paleo Valley. Autumn, tell us about your Turmeric Complex.
At Paleo Valley, we are big believers in food as medicine. And so turmeric, of course, it has beat drugs out. We know it's anti-inflammatory. We know it has brain benefits. We know it has joint benefits. But what most people don't know is that a lot of turmeric supplements only contain one isolated compound of turmeric called curcumin. And so what we did instead was create a complex. We added organic turmeric and then ginger and rosemary and clove, which were some of the most DNA protective spices studied. And we created a complex. We added organic coconut powder and pepper for absorption. And so we've created a really high quality, highly bioavailable turmeric complex that will hopefully help you to feel your best. And all you have to do to check it out is go to paleovalley.com. That's PALEOVALLEY.com. And you can use the code CHECK15, that's lowercase CHEK 15 to save 15%.
In my holistic lifestyle coaching program, where I teach people how to apply the principles that I've developed of a universal approach to consciousness and a universal approach to spirituality. And what I'm saying by that is I teach the Czech Institute Holistic Lifestyle Coaches that it's extremely important not to have a religious bias or any kind of a dogma or it'll always get in the way of your ability to effectively guide people and coach them to creating their own wholeness, to creating their own sense of connection to life. And I tell people, if you're stuck in Christianity, then you're only going to be able to really share your love openly with people of the same philosophy. What do you do if you're coaching someone that has a very diametrically opposed belief system to you, and, for example, doesn't agree with the concept of Jesus whatsoever? It's going to affect you because you're basically acting from a belief system, and belief systems by definition are closed. And if they weren't closed, there would be no way to define the belief system. So there's people that have belief systems that remain open-minded, but when somebody claims I am a Christian or I am a Buddhist or I'm a Muslim, they're by definition designating a belief system. And it's interesting too, because if you look in the work of Dustin DePerna, his book Streams of Wisdom looks at very deeply into what consciousness is and the structure stages of consciousness. And he makes a very important point in there. Their research showed that no Christian having an enlightenment experience ever meets Buddha or Lao Tzu or Muhammad or anybody else. And Buddhists don't ever meet Jesus or Krishna. So he showed that no matter who you are, any enlightenment experience through natural spiritual means or by the use of psychedelics or breathing or anything always comes through your belief system. So I've really worked with all my students to maintain an open mind, look for the beauty of each belief system, but also be aware of where it may limit your client and make sure that you're practicing a life that reflects the coaching you're giving, or you're going to be in a state of chaos trying to help someone find order in their life.
Yeah, I think that's deep wisdom. I think that you struck on what is a relatively new realization for me, which is this thing, beauty. Beauty is the fabric of everything. And so the personal experience of I am has a purpose, and that purpose of being at this moment is to, I believe, recognize beauty. And I can do that in the face of my wife or my children. I can do that in the face of my patients. I can find the beauty in the journeys traveled by those patients in and out of disease. I can see that in a leaf and in the spring as it develops its vibrant, life-giving force to the tree, and a extraordinary gem that's been chiseled out of the center of the earth after millions of years of heat and pressure to manifest something jaw-droppingly gorgeous. Like, in all of these ways, we can see beauty around us, and again, called into this co-creative process where we can put pen to paper, we can put brush to canvas, we can put storytelling at the fireside into action to bring life out of nothing. We can, in storytelling, create whole worlds that have perhaps never existed before. I think J.R.R. Tolkien was the most masterful storyteller of the 20th century in the scope and scale of the stories that he wove, the worlds he created for us. And in that, it's hard to imagine there's not something very real in the universe he created, and in the love and care that he gave to the elven language and the character of the dwarves, and all of these deep things. You can see a humanity emerge from his stories that I think eclipses many of our own experiences of human interactions, and many of our religious texts that miss the nuance of relationship and the nuance of resilience in journey, and that never give up spirit that we see. So the stories we tell and the paintings we paint are manifesting realities that in the end are no less real than the physical life that we live on in this limited plane.
No, in fact, Arthur Eddington, the famous astronomer and quantum physicist, stated at a certain point later in his career, he said, after all my years of, I'm paraphrasing, after all my years of scientific research, the universe appears to me as a great thought rather than a great machine.
Ooh, I like that a lot. And that gets at, this power of gratitude and the power of, manifestation through focus. The great entrepreneurs of the world, or the great politicians of the world, or the great, socio-religious icons of our time, somebody like Gandhi or Jesus Christ, or any of these, figures that have become, cornerstones of our understanding of our capacity. We're calling us into this manifestation process that is realized in prayer or meditation, respectively. And the deeper we go into that, vacuum, if you will, of silence, the more we will align ourselves with that creative force that is within the vacuum space of the universe that spins planets and suns and the rest into existence. It's in that vacuum space where there's this generative quality. And as Stephen Hawking, with all the Hawkins particles coming out of the black holes, stated, all of this information is all tied together through all of the galaxies, through all of the universe, by these wormholes that defy space-time continuums and gravitation and everything else. And so we get this concept where there's this entanglement in the universe of neurologic-like function, as all of physical matter, not just life, but all physical matter starts to participate through the atomic field and through the quantum field and then the boson and everything else into this maelstrom of creativity that all is spinning out ultimately massive biodiversity, massive intention for life and life abundant to set forth, certainly on this planet, but how many billions of other planets, I have no idea. And so it's exciting to think that we have access to that, entanglement in the universe of knowledge and creative capacity. And that's where we start to get into this collision of science and God. Are we now actually describing what we have called God for thousands of years, which is this incredible unifying intelligence, the sea of knowledge that is dispersed and, as always, through its co-creative process with all of the particle moments that it's manifesting, is in a constant adaptation and in a constant evolution of energy and life force. And we can access that. So, there's this real opportunity here, whether you go through the lens of Rumi or the Sufi or the Judeo-Christian worldview, or the simple new practices of mindfulness without any religious context or history to it. Entering into these spaces, we find this generative quality. And one of the striking examples of this is actually the telomeres on the end of each of our DNA, bumper blocks at the end of each gene there, or end of each chromosome. These bumper blocks of the telomeres are produced by telomerase. And so, winning the Nobel Prize for the discovery of telomerase, the scientists there have been striving to find now something that turns on telomerase to extend those bumper blocks so that we could do more cell replications without damaging the important nucleotide sequences within the genome, etc., only to find out that it's prayer and meditation and spiritual song and dance that seems to be the most potent ways to turn on telomerase and create this longevity effect at the genomic level. And so whether it's generative within our own bodies or generative within a dynamic, biodiverse system of the microbiome within the soils and the ecology of our gut and organ systems, all the way into the biodiversity of human vibrations, which manifest themselves as different races and different, ethos and socio-ethnic diversification and all of these things that have emerged on the planets over such short time. Over just a few 10,000 years, we see the Irish language and the beauty of the Chinese language and the exquisite tongue of the native peoples of South America or the First Nations of North America. go into Africa or go into Australia and the Aboriginal voice there, that there's so much vibrational difference between just the human experiences across those continents and races as we see them. And this gets really exciting for me, that Homo sapiens sapien is not really a stagnant species. It's an adaptive species, just like life itself. And as vibration shifts, we see different versions of that universal knowledge and universal creative process manifest in different ways. And we see deep, exquisite philosophy, expressed thousands of years back in what was, often referred to as these pre-technologic eras, which of course contain technologies that we still haven't realized in our modern era. What technology built the pyramids? Nobody knows. We still don't have the technology even to clean up the pyramids or move any of the stones. We don't know how to disrupt gravity in order to move stones that size without breaking them. And so, there is no pre-technology event. There's either the alignment with universal knowledge and co-creative capacity, or decay from and disillusionment that comes out of the malalignment with that nature and co-creative process, which then inevitably leads to a manifest destiny like behavior where we start to try to dominate our environment, kill everything larger than ourselves, ultimately kill everything smaller than ourselves, and create this sterile planet for human existence in its isolation, which of course spells the demise of our entire system, planet, human and otherwise.
And if I can interject, it paradoxically mirrors the entire medical allopathic model.
Precisely.
A clean room where everything's an object, including the patient or a set of data, but not a living being.
That's right. Yeah. And, if you want a scientific proof of the fact of how destructive that is, you don't need to look any further than the second law of thermodynamics, which is one of the most, established and well-proven systems within physics. The second law of thermodynamics states that any system put in isolation increases its entropy, which is the word for chaos. And so it certainly works at the human level. The worst penalty we've ever given anybody is always solitary confinement. Within hours or days of solitary confinement, anybody of any health status or otherwise starts to hallucinate, create voices, create, visual hallucinations, so that there's some sort of companionship, even if it's through schisms of your own mind, to create that lack of loneliness. Because if you stay in that isolated, lonely state with no human touch, no human voice, no second opinion, nothing to reflect back at you, you lose self-identity almost immediately, and you go into a self-destructive, mirage of paranoia and psychosis that will then lead you to, literally beat your own head in against a wall or whatever it is to put yourself out of your misery because you've become isolated. And so that is the reality of what we're doing as you speak it. By sterilizing the operating room and putting a human being in the middle of that, we're going to increase the entropy of that organism throughout the entire surgery. Then we put them in a PACU or an ICU and continuously sterilize them. Their system has to get secondary infections and secondary inflammatory conditions and everything else. And so that's exactly the direction that medicine, fortunately, is starting to move, which is the realization that it no longer matters if it's a brain surgery or a complete hip replacement. They're trying to get you moved, literally starting to walk within hours and out of the hospital within a couple of days, so that you don't have that isolation event. And they're finding that every time they shorten the stay in those isolated spaces, outcomes improve. And so in the end, won't it not be very surprising when we find out that putting people into an extraordinary regenerative electromagnetic field allows them to orient stem cells and regenerate processes within that hip. And it's only going to happen in the resonance chamber of water and microbiome and all of the rest. And, put that in the middle of a field of daisies and wildflowers and, 1,000 species of wild grasses. And then the waving light that filters through leaves of the trees shining down on the glass of that vessel that you've immersed that patient in. Now you're starting to look at the operating room of the future. We're going to understand that Mother Nature has a place of silence within her where regeneration happens automatically. We will place people into natural settings for them to heal their minds, and they cannot be alone in that. They need spiritual and physical connection to all organisms, all life. The eagle that soars over that field will be just as important as the care team at the side of that patient. The groundhog that aerates the soil beneath, the earthworm that tunnels in to create bionutrient availability for the microbiome. These will be the healing, team around that patient in 100 years. That's where we have to go if we're going to survive the ecosystem collapse and the degenerative state of the human condition today.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. All of us at the Czech Institute are excited about releasing our new Golf Performance Specialist online training program, and we're happy to be able to offer you a chance to pre-order the course and get a special $100 first access discount, which is available right now. I developed the Golf Performance Specialist program myself because there was no program in the world that offered a holistic, integrated approach to assessing the golf athlete and getting them balanced, healthy, and performing better. Through my career as a rehabilitation and performance specialist, I've worked with a long string of golfers that were injured and suffering performance plateaus that weren't getting results until I applied the integrated holistic approach I share in the Golf Performance Specialist program, which teaches you how to customize your programs to each individual's needs. Most of them, caught in the traditional mindset of trying to adjust swing faults by modifying their stance or buying new golf clubs, only spent thousands of dollars that didn't help their game. But after applying the principles and practices I teach in this program, came to fully realize that it's the golf athlete that plays the game, not the club. Not only does having this specialized training give you the skills to work with some of the most commonly injured athletes and enthusiasts, it gives you access to millions of people that have the finances to afford your expertise. Regardless if you're a physician treating sports injuries, a physical therapist, chiropractor, osteopath, massage therapist, conditioning specialist, or a player that wants to optimize performance, this course teaches you key assessments and how to address common muscle imbalance syndromes, identify and activate inhibited muscles, optimize core function, and clearly shows you how to progress the player through the essential stages of flexibility, stability, strength, and power development. To pre-order your e-learning course now and receive a special $100 off first access discount, go to czekinstitute.com/GPS online. That's czekinstitute.com/GPS online. I know you're going to enjoy this course. It's very powerful, very holistic, and it works extremely well. My challenge with interviewing you is that I write down like 50 notes while I'm listening to you talk, that each one could be a podcast, which is quite exciting, actually. If I could share a few comments with you that I think might be relevant to our conversation, going back to your love of beauty, Plato and Plotinus both stated that at the root of the archetypal system, which I believe archetypes are the root language of consciousness, was good, beauty, and truth. And so, really, if you look at what a moral is a code of conduct that is life affirmative, but an ethic is a code of conduct that may or may not be life affirmative. So what is good is ultimately moral because it is life affirmative. And so I think if we start thinking about what is really good for all of us on the planet, and knowing that we're all an extension of the great chain of being, as the Buddhists would say, and what I believe from my own experiences practicing shamanism and other meditative practices and spending time in nature, fortunately I'm surrounded by it, but I believe that what they call junk DNA is really a biological record of our evolution within which we have the DNA to communicate through the ethers to pretty much every living creature on the planet, including all the little beings in our microbiome. And that is how shaman were able to find the formulas to make powerful medicines and spiritual medicines like ayahuasca, because when you ask them how they got these formulas, they always say the plants taught us. But the Western materialist mind says, well, that's a bunch of bullshit. Plants don't talk. But when you enter the space of magical consciousness, which is the level of consciousness that existed when we were in that state of our own development, you become one with the plants and the animals. They're more like your brothers and sisters than they are anything else. And so I think we've really lost our way by segregating people, as you say, into isolated systems, because we're really not separate. We're sort of the tip of the evolutionary sword, at least on this planet. And when we lose touch with all the other biological beings, we lose software that is essential. We lose our instinctual drives that were inherently what made life survive for all this time. And we get caught at the mental level with ideas and concepts that are usually driven by a few people trying to make money, but aren't actually authentic with regard to their ability to interface with the rest of our truth of ourselves.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
A couple quick things I wanted to interject before we jump forward is when Moses encountered the burning bush in the Bible, and he thought he was encountering God, he said, "Who are you?" And the response was, "I am that I am." Are you familiar with that?
I am.
Okay. Well, I tell my students, let me show you another way to interpret that passage. When God says, "I am that I am," imagine saying "I am" and then pointing in any direction and saying "that I am." In other words, "I am that I am" becomes "I am that I am." I am that burning bush. I am you, Moses. I am the rock and the soil you're standing on. I'm the donkey you rode in on. I am that I am. I am the universe. And when they see it from that perspective, it really helps them open their minds, because I am that I am can be interpreted many ways. I am that I am, if you read the Bible, means I'm a jealous God that'll burn you in hell for touching your genitals or whatever. But when you realize that the source is everything, then everything is in a process, and we are part of the process. And so when you talked about the second law of thermodynamics and what happens to a system that is put in isolation, how it goes into chaos or entropy, when you look at what any system is, it's energy and information. I don't care if it's the cooling system on your car, the electrical system in your house, or the systems in your computer. They're all made of energy and information. So what we have to realize is that a belief system is also made of energy and information. And when your belief system is isolated, it has to go into entropy because it's isolated and it can no longer connect to higher truths, and nor can you really look for the foundation or the higher elements. In other words, the mystics took us from a place of reading words on paper to legitimate experiences and showed in many cases, which is why they were killed by the church, that the way people were interpreting what God was a closed concept. But really, the mystics were able to climb the ladder of consciousness and say, wait a minute, that does not stop there. That continues infinitely and ends up at a place that you call God, or something that you cannot possibly define with words. So I think I just wanted to share the concept of looking at I am that I am from the perspective of God consciousness, saying I am that, or I am that. And as source, it is all things. There's a couple of other interesting things. There's a famous quantum physicist named John Archibald Wheeler. Are you familiar with him at all?
Yeah, I know his name. I haven't read his work particularly, but he was in line with a lot of the physicists that I'm more familiar with, for sure.
Yeah, he was a black hole physicist, a very, very, very smart guy. And he basically developed a concept that showed that the universe is self-aware and that every part of the universe is connected, and that one of the key reasons that all sentient beings are here is to look at and observe the universe, without which he proposes it wouldn't have much meaning. But the point I'm driving at is in one of his research papers, he says something quite profound. Before I say what he says, consider how many quantum physicists and great scientists like Wolfgang Pauli and Einstein and many others have made statements that are both very scientific and very spiritual after doing all the work, like the universe is a great thought more than a great machine by Eddington. Wheeler said, any moment now, I'm quite sure at the end of one of my mathematical equations, I am going to find a rishi.
I love that. That.
Isn't that just most amazing to hear from a man inside the depths of science at the most elite levels you can get, who's open-minded enough to realize that everything he's validating scientifically had already been said by rishis, mystics, and wise men?
Yeah. I mean, he was a pioneer of quantum physics, and quantum physics is massively challenging any structure in the religious system, and ultimately in that it's seeing beyond the three-dimensional experience, and some would argue maybe time is the fourth dimension, but it's so far beyond that. His work and many others, Lovelace being a great example, started to untangle the reality that quantum physics is only a unified math that is coherent or makes sense in 10 dimensions. And the 10 dimensions is on the side of the superstring theory, which is, if you will, the particle physics side. But on the other side of the bosonic field is an additional 16 dimensions that are then bundled in a single dimension within the 10 dimensions, or sometimes called another 17th dimension that bundles them all together, but is then embodied within this 10 dimensions of this superstring theory field. And so you've got 26 dimensions. Is on the boson field bundled into the one on the and then of the 10. So you got 26 dimensions plus 10 dimensions, one going counterclockwise with 26 dimensions, the other one going clockwise with 10 dimensions. It is the most extraordinary, complex, vibrational reality that is governing particle physics at the atomic level, or at the galactic level, or at the universal level. And so when you start to realize that there's coherent math at every one of those fractal levels that are multidimensional beyond anything that we could call a human experience, you have to start to realize that this is what has been defined as spirituality. Because it was so far outside of the 3 or 4 dimensional space that we experience this particle state of human life in, we chalked that all up to this world of spirituality, and we gave it, names of deities. We gave it, names of, angels and patron saints, and we created some sort of hierarchy of humans that get to be patron saints, or martyrs, or all of these terms of kind of hierarchical importance, which in the end is it's like saying you're a PhD or an MD or triple board certified MD. It's all such irrational characterization and compartmentalization and irrational hierarchies that have nothing to do with the fact that every particle is ultimately expressing some version of this extraordinary 26 dimension reality of the bosonic field and the 10 dimensions of string theory. And all of that is manifesting this co-creative, generative reality that we live in, that's always adaptive, always pushing for biodiversity, always pushing for more alignment with this penultimate knowledge in the universe that is manifest through this vibrational state of quantum physics. And so it's no wonder, and I had a wonderful, word picture in my mind when you mentioned a rishi at the end of the equation. Wouldn't it be fun to then paint that picture not as a shamanic kind of leader in the human state, but a reishi mushroom,
or a psilocybin mushroom.
either
There's
direction.
a reishi in every one of those.
That's right. And so
I've met
won't
several
it
of
be
them.
the
They're very
fungal kingdom
wise.
that it wouldn't surprise me if the fungal kingdom in the end is manifesting a hyperintelligence that humanity has failed to do because we continue to fight against one another and to sequester knowledge and under intellectual property and NDAs and patents and all of this BS about control of knowledge and control of space. That's kept us from hyperintelligence. We can't quorum sense as a species as the fungi can, as the trees can, because we are so busy dividing ourselves away and protecting ourselves from other humans. We haven't reached that hyperdynamic state as a species that we see manifest in something like the mycelial network of the planet Earth, or the extraordinarily bizarre creation of mycorrhizae, which are literally doesn't exist unless you have the mycelium root system of the fungal kingdom abutting a multicellular plant. And then out of the ethers, without any genetic template, those two plants co-create mycorrhizae as this third entity that allows for this transfer of energy, transfer of biophotonic energy, transfer of nutrients into the plant life. And it's just bizarre that neither of those creatures has a genetic understanding of what's needed between them. But in the silence, in the space between, they create mycorrhizae. And it's never existed until both of those species existed. So how does that happen? Like in the emergence of life on Earth, how do mycorrhizae come to be if you can't have a plant without mycorrhizae? And yet you can't have the mycorrhizae without the interaction of a plant with the mycelial bed. For me, the mycorrhizae is this miraculous identification of the quantum field where you can have life literally emerge at multiple levels simultaneously if it's aligned with this multidimensional space-time bending phenomenon of 26 dimensions and beyond. So what are we going to then settle on as doctors or as patients, as we will all become?
One of the key points Zach Bush makes in his many talks on the COVID pandemic is that destruction of the environment for commercial gains is leading to high levels of toxicity. The result is that nature releases viruses to inform us and stimulate our genes to make essential adaptations so we can survive and clean the mess up and bring balance back to nature and ourselves. You will also hear Zach Bush and many other experts highlight the fact that it is mostly the people that are already unhealthy that are at risk, and many of them suffer from global inflammation or metabolic syndrome. Having worked with countless of such cases of chronic inflammation, overweight, and obese clients, and people who just don't feel well, I can assure you that eating high-quality organic food is an essential first step. The problem is that most people's digestion, metabolism, assimilation, and elimination is so poor they can't get the nutrients from even the best foods and supplements. That's why one of the first improvements I make to help people heal is to get them on highly effective digestive enzymes and probiotics. Bioptimizer's Masszymes are excellent for supporting digestion, and their P3OM prebiotic is one of my trusted guardians whenever I feel like I've been exposed to a pathogenic bacteria, such as food poisoning. They have detoxification support, a parasite kill formula, and their Capex enzymes help digest fats and flesh foods while naturally stimulating your metabolism to keep your energy levels up and your body looking great. I use their products every day, and every client I've turned them on to loves them, hands down. To look at Bioptimizer's amazing line of products, go to www.bioptimizers.com. That's bioptimizers.com/living4D. And on checkout, use the code PAUL10. That's lowercase PAUL 10 to get your 10% discount on any of your amazing Bioptimizers products.
In those moments, as we are faced with our own mortality and approach the veil and start to have to surrender control over our perceived realities, we're going to have to merge back into that quantum state. We're going to have to surrender our firm orthodoxy of reality and start to surrender to this bigger field effect of universal knowledge. And it's such a high percentage of my patients that will begin to speak to their long deceased relatives, or start to see those relatives visiting them in the hospital or in the nursing home, or in the operating room itself, and then they'll tell you about that conversation. And what always strikes me as such evidence of the reality of those conversations is they're never steeped in intense emotion. And so if this was something that was emerging from a traumatized mind, or a mind that was completely diluted by the drug effect of general anesthesia or something like that, then these events would necessarily be expressed in that fight or flight state, or that traumatic effect of fear, or letting go and lack of control or abandonment. And yet that's never what comes out of these conversations. It's always out of this real sense of peace and acceptance of, oh, I had this conversation. And there's always usually a little chuckle in the mix, which, if there's humor in it, again, it proves one more level of reality to me, that this wasn't something manifested out of some schism of memory, but this is a real human experience with all of the levels of emotion expressed in it, as they have a dialogue with persons who have shaped them. And when I say persons, these are other IMs. There's lots of these energetic collections with sense of self-identity that can present themselves to this individual who has that thinning of the veil, and they carry on a conversation, and they recognize the physical attributes of that person, not because they're physically seeing them, but because they're experiencing through the lens of the human particle state the same energy field that person had in the body, and they're going to interpret it with the same physical form as they recall there, because the frequency vibration fits the memory of that individual, and so they can create the entire human experience of that interlog. And I'm fascinated by such an event, because it starts to suggest that there's an actual hologram happening in the mind's eye, and we are holographically projecting the physical reality around us in our interpretation of vibration. And that's it. We are literally in this pool of vibration in the entire, reality that supersedes the universe as we understand it. And in that pool of vibration, we develop an Umfeld, that wonderful German word that kind of captures this understanding or philosophy of a cohesive perspective. My Umfeld is that I am Zach Bush, and I'm a medical doctor, and I'm sitting in a padded room right now, not because I'm crazy yet, but because I'm in a sound booth, and I'm having a conversation with Dr. Check, and we're going. That's such a, there's so many layers of lenses and perceptions and perspectives that have to be placed on this reality that we're in for me to even perceive any separation from you right now. In reality, you and I are holographic, vibrational expressions that are happening in such close proximity on the universal scale that we might as well be unified. We might as well be of that one mind, of that one heart, of that one spirit, because we are in such extreme proximity in our vibrational experiences. And once we start to merge that state of being and move now from embracing the reality of that experience for that patient in the operating room or the ICU, and then take that into our daily lives. What if I have the same sense of reverence for my coworkers or my kids or, my parents, that says, here's a vibrational force that's trying to sort itself out amidst all of these overlapping vibrational states that we call physical life. And what a reverence I should have that I've been gifted the opportunity to share space and time in this, limited dimensional experience with that vibration, and to pick up on all of the knowledge that will be carried in the particle state of that vibration, so that I can be enriched by that. And there doesn't need to be a verbal transaction. This is a quantum physics fellowship. This is a breaking of bread, if you will, on a deep quantum level that we enter into when we acknowledge one another and say, yes, I would like to spend my precious time in a conversation with you, so that we can create something together. We can be in a co-creative process, not so much through our words, but simply through the space that we hold between our vibrations.
Yes. I got a whole list of notes for you, but, I'm sure you've studied with enough questions about what God is to come to realize that God is quite a paradox. So, assuming that you've come to that realization, I have a little something for you.
All right.
You mentioned that, what's happening here is a hologram, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, try this one in your pipe. God is a hologram.
Anything speaks to the vacuum space I'm passionate about. So I keep going on your description there, but I think I know where you're going already.
Well, God is a hollow, empty gram. What is a photon? It's something that's got no mass. A hollow gram. Everything we think we weigh and measure an atom is 99.999 to the 6th decimal point empty. So we weigh grams, but in actual fact, they're more hollow than there are anything else. So therefore, what I'm saying is it's a paradox in that everything that we think of and can weigh and measure as something, as tangible, which is what scientific materialism is based on, is actually hollow. And therefore, the truth is that consciousness is manifesting this stuff out of energy and information. But if you disentangle it, you get back to a 0 point. The 0 point field is the source from which everything emerges, but it's winding what appears to be nothing into something. But what I tell people is the problem with that concept is that even empty space is absolutely bursting with energy. Richard Feynman showed 1 square centimeter of space has enough energy to boil all the oceans on the planet instantly. So when you realize that what's being manifested isn't being manifested out of nothing, it's being manifested out of no thing, which is the basis of everything. And therefore, the gram, that something, is actually hollow. And there's the paradox. And the only way you can get past it is to stop thinking and become fully present with what we call silence. And when you're fully present with silence, well, you find out something quite mysterious. It's explosive. It's so explosive, it creates universes, stars, planets, people, moments at the speed of now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. And I think, another look at that, hologram is, just the density of vacuum space when it's filled with the electromagnetic field, and so that calculation similarly, basically saying the same thing, but maybe easier to visualize is that the electromagnetic field vibrating in the vacuum is composed of many, many wavelengths of Planck's constant. And so the Planck's constant is the tiniest thing ever measured in physics, the vibration of the electromagnetic field in a vacuum. And it turns out that there's a mass to that wavelength. Wavelengths can be in the particle state and therefore carry a mass. And so the mass of the Planck's constant, when multiplied out to understand how many Planck's constants fit in that cubic centimeter that you were describing from Richard Feynman's work, that cubic centimeter actually contains so many Planck's constants that the density of that cubic centimeter of vacuum space is actually 13 zeros more dense than all of the physical matter in the entire universe squished into the same cubic centimeter. And so you're at like 10 to the 96, or something like that, grams per cubic centimeter in that single 1 by 1 by 1 centimeter of vacuum space that's full of the electromagnetic field. So when you say that there's nothing in there, there's actually the heaviest thing, and the thing with the most profound gravitational force ever discovered is certainly the electromagnetic field in vacuum space. And so as planets emerge from the vacuum, they are behaving in very deliberate and highly predictable, material behaviors as a result of the gravitational force that is so logarithmically greater in the vacuum than anything that the physical matter on that planet could contain. And so the Earth is so stable in its structure, whether you're talking about the mineral structure, the water structure, the carbon molecular structure of life. All of these forces are so stable because of their organization within this intense gravitational stability of the vacuum space from which it has emerged. And that's just a reminder to me to not feel ungrounded by the information that we are mostly vacuum space. That, instead of making us feel empty, should make us feel extremely solid. We should feel such mass and such presence in our understanding of the word, vacuum. That is no longer describing something empty. It's describing the most intense physical presence.
It's interesting because over 2,300 years ago, the philosopher Plotinus said the concept of the vacuum is incorrect. The vacuum is simultaneously the plenum.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, when you were talking about the dimensions in the philosophy of Hinduism, which is the source of the 7 chakra system, the sages said that there are 7 dimensions within which there are 7 dimensions within which there are 7 dimensions, which goes on infinitely. So they had a 7-dimensional model which fit the chakra system. But my point is that those guys who spent, 30 years in caves, spending time getting as deep into silence as you can go and observing it, were stating that the dimensional concept is infinite. There is no end to it. Hi, everybody. You've heard me talk about Symbiotica's Golden Mind before, but I couldn't help bringing Shervin in to tell us more about it. Golden Mind is an amazing adaptogen product. An adaptogen is a herb or a substance that helps you manage stress. I love Golden Mind when I've got a busy day and a busy mind and lots going on and dealing with people's challenges and just trying to find time to center myself. And so I use a little Golden Mind and it just centers me up and makes me feel good. But Shervin, tell us what's special about Golden Mind and what should we be using it for other than just managing stress, which is everybody's issue these days?
You got it, man. Golden Mind's one of my main products that I use personally every single day, probably twice a day. We're in the biohacker world today and all that stuff. I don't really resonate with that energy. I resonate more with a balanced mentality.
I say don't biohack, biosynergize.
Yeah, biosynergize, right? Yeah. And that's a synergy product. Golden Mind's a synergy formula. So we combined Ayurveda with traditional Chinese herbal medicine with new pharmacology technology, liposomal micelles. Yeah. So we took things like ginseng and bicopa and rhodiola and ashwagandha, all of these different things. And we put it together with a chai latte flavor. And you just reach into your little bottle, you squirt that out. All of a sudden, you're reducing your stress load. You're reducing that energy that's been building up all throughout the day. All the stuff that we're dealing with in this mechanistic material world that's compiling on top of us. This is one of the best ways to do it. We also have lion's mane in there. So that's
great for the brain.
Great for the brain. It's brain nourishing. It's a balancer. Everyone who takes it realizes a calming sense.
Naturally great for kids, right?
100%.
I hope so, because I've been giving it to mine.
Good job, man. So this is like a nootropic stack, but a balancer. It's not filled with synthetics and chemicals that are made in research labs. I don't believe in any of that stuff.
Yeah,
we're not designed for that.
I find it gives me a sense of ease, like when you're getting a massage, how you start to relax. So when I need a massage that I can just put in under my tongue and chill out, I go for Golden Mind, and you should too. So go to Symbiotica.com, Symbiotika.com, and on checkout, use your code CHECK15, all caps, capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 15, To get your 15% discount while you're there, check out all their other amazing products because your discount is across the board. I hope you enjoy your golden mind.
They will. And I want to add, we have L-theanine and ocean minerals in there. And that is the balance. So you balance like the ocean.
Very good. Well, there you go. You heard it from the master, the formulator himself. So enjoy your golden mind. You've got your discount code, check 15 in caps, symbiotica.com. Enjoy.
Yeah, I think that, in weird ways, the current math coming out of, Schwartz and Brewer and all these amazing physicists, in the last 30 years that are, advancing superstring theory and all of this are starting to describe something similar, which is that, even one of these 10 dimensions that are contained within superstring theory can have these two like donut-looking halves, and in that dimension, these two donuts can express energy in an infinite fashion. And so a single dimension can actually contain not only all of the boson, dimensions within it, it can also, in the same way, contain all space-time, all of the reality within it, because it's actually an infinite space in and of itself. It doesn't rely on the other dimensions for its structure. And so I think it's possible that, through all of these different avenues of intense, mathematics, all the way to the intense meditation and the mind in silence, is demonstrating something of the infinite quality. And whether we could call it 7 or 26 is probably irrelevant. Even that numerical systeming has probably got its own Umfeld limitations to it there. But the excitement to me is that the smaller we look, the more holographic in nature becomes. And in that way, I mean, in a hologram, every single pixel of light expressing, a large three-dimensional structure in a hologram actually has the entire three-dimensional structure expressed by those billion points of light in the single light speck. And so that's the hologram, is that all knowledge of all things, of all structure in all time, can be held in the single point of light within a hologram. And I often feel like a single point of light when I am most hopeless. I feel like, man, how can I keep moving the ball forward? How can I hope that mankind wakes up fast enough in the next 8 years so that we prevent the mass extinction of our ocean systems that then, collapses all of the ecology on the planet over the next few decades, and my children are the last generation to have the chance to live to 78-year average, and we see the collapse of species and our own extinction emerging. It can feel like we are going out. We are dimming. Our light is dimming as a species. But then you step back for a moment and you start to think about this, and you watch somebody dying at the bedside, a hospice patient taking those last few breaths in the last few moments of life, and they have often this inexplicable peace and this inexplicable sense of expansion and this inexplicable capacity to heal relationships at the bedside, and just through a couple words reconcile, decades of estranged relationships with loved ones or children, and in single words can somehow reconnect the whole human experience for that child on the other side of the hand. And in holding each other's hands, they create this supernova of human experience, and there's tears and there's laughter and there's release and there's grief and there's love and there's certainly the recognition of beauty in that moment. If we need to go through our hospice experience as a species to have those real moments together at the deathbed so that we can supernova the human experience past the physical manifestation or the hologram of this particle moment that we're in, to rediscover, to replug into the energetic reality that we are knit from, that we are expressions of, that's fine. That's a celebration. We will not grieve that process as much as we will find joy in that process. But nonetheless, I have to wonder if there's an opportunity to extend this particle moment a little bit longer as a species and ultimately as a planet that would support life. What if we re-engineered everything in these next 8 to 10 years? Could we start to re-envision our energy, our technologies of transportation and communication, our technologies of technological commerce and transport of goods around the world, food services, food systems, soil systems, water systems? Could we recreate all of this quick enough? Not because we find some new ingenuity that surpasses everything, but instead we find a moment of silence long enough to meditate long enough to manifest a simple new reality. And in some interesting way, this recent pandemic, I believe, was the first global meditation that's ever happened. And in its appearance,
I think so.
It looked very perverse. We focused all this fear and attention on a virus that certainly didn't deserve any fear. It deserved our respect rather than our fear. And yet it still had the effect. We still meditated as 7 billion people on a single thing for the first time, perhaps.
Yes, and I'm sure you're familiar with all the measurements from random event generators and how when things like Princess Diana died or 911, they showed that something that produces random ones and zeros at a rate of about 50% showed a high level of responding to the emotions and the thoughts and the feelings of the collective of the people. Are you familiar with that kind of research?
Yeah, and I think George Floyd was a second event, and so why did we see a social outcry that we've never seen with another black man being killed by a police officer, or a black woman being killed in her bed by a black police officer, suddenly having far more weight to it than any time in human history, and so we are starting to organize that quorum sensing capacity, this hyper intelligence that we're capable of when we unify the human mind towards an event. And I think we will find out that in our that there's some deep potential for error when we start to think about the word good that you said earlier was one of the cornerstones of I think it was the
Archetypes.
Sufi archetypes there. And so with that concept of good, we could look at something like George Floyd's murder and say this is inherently not good. Or we could say this is a physical event within this particle experience of humanity, and we can find beauty in that. And when we find the beauty in that, we'll realize a whole different level of awareness as a species. Is it good that he was murdered? No, but the beauty in it was that his mother showed up, and suddenly I think she was there with him. And so when he called out, that wasn't out of desperation. He called out an acknowledgement of her presence approaching his in that particle state, and that's beautiful. A mother's spirit never suppressed, a mother's spirit always present, a maternal instinct always available to her son in a time of transition, a time of transformation, if you will, from that particle state back into the ethereal state of that soul that came in on purpose to walk a difficult life, a life full of human tragedy and human heartbreak and human mistakes, if you will, and all of the other things that we'll each walk. And yet, in the end, it was there to show the world a moment of meditative pause of 8 minutes. What a long meditation ultimately his life manifested. And I think if we look through all of time, you would be hard pressed to find any other human that was able to focus as many human minds as George Floyd did in those 8 minutes. And so that maybe was the penultimate purpose of that lifetime and that sole purpose that he came in here with. But it certainly manifests something beautiful out of its tragic nature.
Well, that would make him both a saint and a martyr for a good cause, which is a very high accolade, a high regard that deserves all of us to be in a state of reverence, respect, worship, and gratitude for the conscious awakening that his gift to us all brought us.
Yes.
to me, looking at this through the eyes of archetypes and the hero's journey archetypes, I think that what we're going through really is a rite of passage where we are now being given the opportunity to become adults and accept responsibility for our choices and our actions, how we spend our money, how we vote, and to wake up to the fact that we are capable of using the same powers of destruction as a means of creativity, co-creativity with each other, and getting over religious and racial and national differences, and realizing that the foundation of life that supports all of us and gives life to our children and our future is nature itself. And that if we repurpose our militaries to protect us against the greatest threats, such as the destruction of the topsoil, cleaning up the environment, and creating world peace instead of having enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet 179 times over, that we will become adult co-creators. And in that process of realizing our responsibility and our creative power, we'll realize our place in the earth and what the earth really is. Because once we reach the heart together, I think we will reach a state of coherence where many of the other dimensions that remain invisible to the conditioned mind become manifest, as they have to almost anybody that reached an enlightenment state throughout the history of all the mystics and the rishis and the sages and the saints.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's tempting to rush there with the desire to be part of that enlightened state, but I have this thing in the back of my mind that is kind of laughing, saying, "Do you really want enlightenment, or do you want to stay in the particle state a bit longer?" And I think that's the reality for me right now. Is I'm actually enjoying my lack of knowledge. I'm actually enjoying my lack of experience of the universal continuum of energy flow, and I'm liking the experience of an Umfeld. I actually have human perspective in the particle state right now, and I love it. I love to touch my wife's back when she's sleeping. I love to smell a flower in the morning when the dew is still rising from the earth and settling on those leaves. I love the sound of tree frogs at night in Virginia. I love the sound of waves crashing in the hot summer sun in Hawaii. These are very finite things that I just described. These can only be experienced if you're in a particle state, and therefore, I believe, not yet enlightened.
I would have to interject there. You're looking at this from one perspective, but I have to say, isn't it just as true that all those finite experiences are riding on the wave of the infinite? And I would reframe the word enlightenment from the perspective of Kabir, the famous Hindu Muslim mystic and spiritual teacher, who said, enlightenment is not something that you do in a cave. Enlightenment's not real unless you're participating in the world. He was a weaver. He worked and made things, and he encouraged all of the people that studied under him and reached enlightenment to engage the world, to make the world a more better place for all living beings. And so when I use the word enlightenment, I'm not using it in the term or the concept of nirvana, which means to blow out or to extinguish or to escape. I'm using enlightenment as a means in which I say, to the degree you realize what life is and what love is and what good is and what beauty is and what truth is, then your life mirrors that and is an example of that, so that those that are less developed in their consciousness or their growth as adults or human beings can be inspired like we've been inspired by Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and a lot of the other great ones. So from that perspective, I'm not using enlightenment as a limitation on the experience, because I love to touch my kids and I love to enjoy exercise and fresh air and see the coyotes and the bobcats and smoke some good pot and hang out with my friends and lift weights. We all want that. That's why we're here, So I would like to just close by saying, for the listeners, I have a lot that Zach and I did not get into, so I will offer Zach another opportunity as soon as he wants to do it to come finish the rest of the questions, because I think they're all meaningful and deep and relevant to the situation of the world today. But Zach, I'd like to close with this. When I teach my students how to do therapy and how to coach people, I tell them the first thing you have to identify is what the person's dream is. Why do they want to heal? What are they going to do when they feel better? What is their dream goal or objective? Because that puts meaning to the process, and it connects the flow of energy and information to a specific direction that has value to that individual. So my question is, if there's a common dream that we have together, if we all come to a unified awareness, at least enough of us collectively to swing the weight of consciousness in the direction of what we all know is essential for us all at this right now, how important do you think it is that we all come to some sort of awareness of the things that we all need together and use that as our dream to guide our actions, our intentions?
Sounds magnificent in its import. I think that this whole discussion is hammering on a raw potential. There's just this massive potential that we have as a species to co-create something really magnificent, and the path there is unknown, and that's beautiful. The path into silence is as mysterious as the silence itself. And so what is going to be a big enough catastrophic, cataclysmic event in human history to create enough silence that we would create a different reality for ourselves? It may be death. We may need that extinction event to reprogram at the depth that we're capable of creating. But it's possible that we start to see so much beauty around us in everything, beauty in the tragedies, beauty in the climactic events of the planet, beauty in extinction, and the capacity of nature to create more life and more biodiversity out of extinction than it does in times of plenty. And so I don't know what it's going to look like, and it keeps me awake some nights worrying on the human plane for my children and grandchildren, but it also inspires me to get out of bed in the morning with the potential that I could potentially in my lifetime participate in a moment of silence for the planet and a co-creative process that would reinvent everything. And I hope to see at least ripples of that true capacity that we have with one heart and one mind as people.
Well, what an amazing circle we've just made. We started at I am, and there is no God but God. I worship everyone and everything. And I think we've just closed with I am, and there is no God but God. I worship everyone and everything.
Beautiful.
Zach, you are an amazing man, and I'm deeply grateful for you on this planet. And I think you're an absolutely important example to other medical doctors. From my perspective, you are being breathed by the intelligence of that which creates all. And may you have the moments of silence that you need to feel connected to the inspiration and the wisdom that guides you to completely fulfilling your life path. And I will be right beside you, as will all Czech professionals, to try to be the best living examples we can to help people through this process that we're all going through. And if the worst thing that happens is we die and we wake up and do it better because we're more awake to the choices we've made, that will be the outcome. But in the meantime, if we can live more and die less, I think we'll probably enjoy that even more.
Well, we'll certainly be enriched by the journey. And so I thank you for that prayer, and thank you for the conversation and the fellowship, and thank you for the strong presence of the audience here joining us through a wormhole of space-time to be completely present with us recording, so that you were part of this journey with us, and acknowledge each of you and the beauty that you bring to it.
Amen. Aho, Great Spirit. We are safe. We are home. We are whole. Zach, where can people find you and whatever you'd like to share with people?
ZachBushMD.com is my education website. You're welcome to dive in there. If you want to explore our work with the food systems and agriculture through our nonprofit, we're always looking for more support and help in getting out the extraordinary opportunity for regenerative health to come out of regenerative farming and food systems. That's farmersfootprint.us, farmersfootprint.us online. We'll get you to that extraordinary initial project there, and there will be a large ecosystem of other projects emerging over the next few months as we continue to partner with great groups around the world to manifest a different future for soil, water, and air systems. So farmersfootprint.us can get you in support of that. An exploration for resources within your clinics for any healthcare providers, the science of the microbiome and the intelligence of nature emerging from our science of last decade can be found at ionbiome.com to understand how you can reconnect your patients and your community and family to microbial intelligence that date back some 60 million years. So ionbiome.com will get you to all of that science and opportunity there.
That's absolutely beautiful. And in closing, thank you again, Zach, and thank you to all the sponsors of Living 4D with Paul Chek. And I want all of you to know that the sponsors of this podcast share the very values that Zach and I are sharing with you right now. So every purchase you make from our sponsors supports my ability to bring amazing minds like Zach Bush, MD, to share with you so we can all grow together. So thank you to the sponsors, and thank you to all of you for listening. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it. It's a very important one, as I'm sure you're aware at this point. So your love is a great support to me and helps me help other people be supportive of all of us. So hope you enjoyed the show. Look forward to seeing you next time. Zach, thank you very much.
Paul Chek, thank you.
Aho.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Zach Bush, MD. You can follow Dr. Zach on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Zach Bush, MD, or at Farmer's Footprint, or at Ion Biome. Find him online at zachbushmd.com, farmersfootprint.us, or ionbiome.com. Dr. Zach is offering Paul's listeners a special 15% discount off your next Ion Biome order, excluding subscriptions. Visit bit.ly/Ion Biome. That's bit.ly/IONBIOME before July 28th to take advantage of this offer and use the coupon code CHEK1KS. That's capital CHEK, the number 1, capital K, capital S. Follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living4D Podcast or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living4D with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and at the Chek Institute's new streaming media site, chekiva.com.